Hello, and welcome back. I am here with the promised Q&A video where I will be answering all your burning questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. There were a lot of questions sent in, so I had to kind of go through them. Picked a couple of questions, many of which I think multiple people asked. I was originally going to do a cook and chat, but some of these questions require 100% of my attention, so we'll just have like a nice little heart-to-heart. All right, let's get right into it. I'm starting off with a bunch of culinary school questions. I'd love to know the behind the scenes when you first had the thought and process to prepare for your Paris adventure, research, planning, selecting the class/school, renting the apartment, travel, and expenses. It's a great question. There's like multiple parts to it. But to start with, the idea of going to culinary school was something that I always wanted to do. Even as a little kid, like I want to be a chef when I grow up. But to be actually planning for it, this was something I seriously thought about around 3 years ago. At that time, I was still working full-time at BuzzFeed. So I was actually trying to look at classes that would allow me to attend outside of work hours. Schedule eventually became a little too difficult to work around, but that's around the time I started saving and specifically setting aside a budget for culinary school. And now going back to the question, because I know that was a big one, I'm going to sort of break down the rest of my answers with these other more specific questions. Why didn't you choose to do an intense course in New York City? And do you think the Paris one is worth it? Even before I decided on where to do the course, I was trying to decide what course I even wanted to take, because I wanted to do all of them: boulangerie, patisserie, cuisine. And when it came down to picking one out of the three, bread just made the most sense to me. And not just because I really love bread, even though that's a totally valid reason. I just feel like it's an art that I have such like an intense love for, but actually the least experience in. But also from a logistical and logical standpoint, the art of making bread is just something that seems a lot harder to perfect at home, because this is a process that requires a lot of time. And more often than not, you also need a controlled environment, because everything can potentially affect bread: the temperature, the humidity. So when I was thinking about it, what better place to do this than at school, where you have a dedicated space and schedule to like fully devote yourself to bread. And well, once I decided on taking bread classes, I just knew I had to go to France. I wanted to be in a place where bread isn't just sustenance. And this love for bread that they have translates into just how seriously and how passionate they are about bread making. And these are the people that I want to learn from. Is culinary school worth it? How much does it cost? The most asked question, which is totally valid. The course I took was around 3,000 euros, and that's for a class of around 13 people. We would have classes from Monday to Friday, around 9:30 to 6 p.m. And it's like a full schedule where we usually have like a 45-minute lunch break in between, but everything else is like not a second goes wasted. Personally speaking, I never felt more fulfilled than I did in those 9 hours every day. I loved every second of it. So for me, it is totally worth it. I will say though, something to consider if you are looking to do culinary school abroad, rent is also something that you need to be thinking about. Of course, this varies depending on where you go. I really prioritized finding a place that was near the school within walking distance. So rent actually ended up being a little more expensive, and I budgeted around 3,000 euros. So it's definitely an investment. Why choose Ferrandi instead of other schools like Le Cordon Bleu? I was actually deciding between these two schools. I spent a lot of time comparing the syllabuses of the courses and also just reading reviews of alumni who have taken classes there before, a lot of Reddit threads. I will say it ultimately came down to the length of the courses and the pricing. The shortest boulangerie course that Le Cordon Bleu offers is a 3-month course, while Ferrandi offers a 2-week introductory course. A lot of you also asked why I didn't go straight into an intensive course, and it was honestly something I debated for a long time, but eventually I thought it was a better idea to test it out first, and also so I have more time to sort of structure my schedule better. And so because the course is much shorter, the difference in prices are also significantly bigger, with Ferrandi being the more affordable option. Do you recommend the short culinary course for someone who has an office job, or should it be for people who are more dedicated to cooking? I think as long as you're someone who's interested in cooking or baking, this course is for you. Because the course isn't that long, it doesn't require that much time commitment, which I feel like is usually the biggest concern. Is the Ferrandi baking course recommended for beginners, and did you find it useful? I would say even if you're a little bit inexperienced, it is still a great course to start with, because there's a lot of hand holding, mostly to make sure you're on the right track, right? Because they're building your foundation, even though you do benefit from being a fast learner. To give you an idea of who was in my class, for example, there were people who were looking to start a bakery. There were people who were really skilled in pastry, patisserie, but they wanted to kind of up their bread skills. There was even one person who's never made bread before. My favorite though was this one guy who we all thought owned like a bakery business back home because he was asking these like really good technical questions. Turns out he just took time off to do this course because him and his partner really love bread, and I respect that so much. Point is, it really is for everyone. How was the experience? Incredible. Even just saying that feels like such an understatement because it was everything I could have hoped for and more. I went in there wanting to learn, to absorb, and I was able to do that in an environment, a classroom where everyone else had the same mindset. So it just felt incredibly rewarding. I did hear that it can be competitive in some intensive courses, but maybe because this is an introductory course, everything just felt so much more collaborative. Like, yes, it's still intense and you're still gonna be exhausted after a full day of baking, but it was just such a thrill to be able to go in knowing that you're gonna walk out at the end of the day with new skills. Not to mention multiple bags of bread. I also think that we really lucked out with an amazing instructor, Chef Didier. He's someone who's obviously very experienced, but also someone who genuinely loves bread. And I feel like that makes such a huge difference for the learning process. What's your favorite, and if there is, least favorite moment in culinary school or in Paris? For culinary school, the first thing that comes to mind, that is sort of a bit of both, is what I like to call the post-bake assessment. So for example, after our baguette bakes, we would have to present our bread to both the chef and the entire class. Think Great British Bake Off.
Started making it, had a breakdown. Bon appetit.
Quite terrifying. I'd always end up being a little anxious leading up to it. But that said, I do think it is a great way to learn. And I say that because the comments and critiques for everyone's bake actually ends up being very helpful for us to learn the do's and don'ts of baking. A baguette that doesn't have distinct marks on top, that's what happens if you don't score deep enough. Basically now we can actually have real life examples of different scenarios to refer to and to learn from. Would you like to take another culinary course, but this time about savory dishes? I do really want to, especially for cuisine. Maybe in a few years or so though. A lot of the longer courses do require a lot more logistical preparation, so I would have to sort of figure that out. And if I'm going back to Paris again, I would really need to brush up on my French because a lot more internship opportunities open up if you speak the language. What was your favorite thing to learn how to bake in culinary school? I was honestly really excited to finally learn how to make a baguette. So that is my #1 favorite. Moving on to our Paris life questions. What's the biggest lifestyle difference in Paris? Thank you for the kind comment, by the way. Do you know that saying, work to live, don't live to work? For a lot of us here, I feel like we're constantly stuck in this live to work grind mindset. But over there, people actually seem to have a work-life balance. This is a very small example, but lunch breaks are actually lunch breaks, where the stores literally close down with a sign that says, be back in 1 to 2 hours, so they can actually go and enjoy the day for a little bit. There also just seems to be a lot more third spaces for people to hang out at. In the afternoon, you just see everyone out in the sun, at the park, at the cafes, you know, having a drink, maybe a bottle of wine, just enjoying the moment. It just felt alive. Are French people as mean to foreigners or tourists as their reputation suggests? This is my 3rd time in Paris, and I will admit, at first I thought maybe I just got lucky or something, but I actually don't think I've experienced anyone being rude. Most, if not all, the Parisian people I met were really nice. Like, I felt welcomed, even when I tried to order a baguette or croissant in my broken French. What's the best thing you ate in Paris that wasn't bread or pastry? Duck is probably the answer. Which restaurants or bakeries in Paris were so good that you'd have to visit again? I feel like I need to write all of this properly down so you can have it for reference. What are you gonna miss the most from your time there? I know this is a predictable answer from me, but I really loved how there was a bakery at every other block. There was almost always fresh baguettes, really good croissants, and also they're so affordable. That's what I miss. Baguettes and croissants are literally almost never over 150 euros. And as someone who generally likes eating meat on the rarer side of medium rare with a glass of wine, I mean, Paris is perfect for that. I actually also really liked their transport system. I really liked the metro. It was so easy to get anywhere. The trains would come within like 2 to 3 minutes, which is a miracle if you compare it to New York. I really just enjoyed being able to live there at that same pace of life, to experience the mundane. I think in the process, I kind of just fell in love with the city a little bit. Moving on to a few cooking questions. You've probably answered this before, but have you always been into cooking and creating, or is this a hobby that you got into? Would you ever want to write a cookbook? The real answer is I've always been really into food. Like, I was a chubby baby who would immediately stop crying if you put food in my grubby little hands. That love for food very naturally transitioned into this love for cooking and baking because of how much joy it brought me. This kind of ties into the next question, which is how do you keep your passion for cooking alive? What motivates you to keep cooking meals that seem completely new to you? I think it really is this desire to discover and create new things that kind of keeps me going a lot of times. There's so much out there for us to learn, and I love being able to like find pieces here and there that I can then incorporate into my own sort of cooking journey. Like, even a dish I try outside at the restaurant is something that would give me new inspiration. And on the topic of cookbooks, I don't know, maybe. Is that something you'd be interested in? What's the longest you think you could last without bread? I think I could last, but I'd probably be depressed. What is your favorite thing to eat with baguette? Fig jam, ham and cheese, with arugula, drizzle of balsamic vinegar and olive oil. So good. Or actually, I could just eat the baguette as it is. It's probably what I do most of the time. If you could be bread, what bread would you be? I don't know. There's so many to choose from. I would say like a Japanese shiopan, like a salted bread roll. It looks like a more friendly croissant. It's crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, a little bit buttery, but salty. What would you say? I want to know your answers. You probably accumulate so many ingredients when making videos, especially the themed ones, like eating for 24 hours. How do you handle all the leftover ingredients? Absolutely something I deal with more often than not. I don't know why I always just end up doing so many recipes for a video. Well, that pasta video I just did, I really did just end up meal prepping of sorts. But what ends up happening in the aftermath is honestly a lot of repurposing leftovers and ingredients. Remember that very hearty broth I made with a whole duck? That ended up being a great base for multiple meals. I think I maybe made some sort of braised meat with it. Definitely made some instant ramen using this extremely indulgent broth. What I really love about the concept though is how it actually gives me this opportunity to play with a lot of new ingredients. Pretty cool. Will you make more what I eat in a day videos? Yes, I love doing those once in a while, but I've also just been trying to come up with new formats, new ideas, just like switch things up a little bit. Is ciabatta just a soggy baguette? How could you say something so controversial, yet so brave? But also, how dare you? Soggy baguettes is a terrible insult. That being said, you're actually not entirely wrong if you're talking about the dough, because the ciabatta we made at school was actually repurposing the baguette dough, where we added more water to the dough to up the hydration. So technically, favorite spread on bread, probably some type of sweet, savory nut butter. Eliminate one forever. Noodle versus bread. Don't do this to me. Really don't do this to me. And now I'm stressed. So we're gonna move on. After your transition to making your own content at your own pace, how have you been feeling? How are you doing these days? Well, first of all, thank you. I think a lot of you actually checked in and asked how I was doing. I appreciate that a lot. I think it's been 1.5 years now. I don't regret it for a moment. It is just like a huge learning curve in a lot of ways. I appreciate that I have the opportunity to do a lot of cool things now that I wasn't able to do before, that I get to go to culinary school in Paris. I think it can be very isolating. I think it can be very stressful at times. I miss just having to worry about the creative. I think there are days where I feel very purposeful, very fulfilled, and then there are days not so much, where I kind of have to remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think I'm starting to find a good rhythm that fits me. That's also part of the reason why YouTube is so important to me. I feel like my heart and soul is ultimately still here with this community. Would you ever open a bakery or store of your own? What would be on the menu? If you would, I'd literally move across oceans to visit. That is really sweet. I appreciate it. I think a lot of you are very excited about me potentially opening a bakery, and that is maybe a dream in the further future. I think if I actually set up a bakery, a brick and mortar, I would not be able to be here and make content the way that I want to be making them. Right now, my focus is on this channel and a couple other projects that I have lined up, but I might have pop-ups coming soon. So that might be the closest it's gonna get for now, which leads me to our last question. Update on the treats and foods you planned to sell, please. So glad you asked because it's been a 2-year process now. I actually had to make some significant changes to my original product because of some logistical issues, but we are getting so close to having the final product. We have the final flavors decided, we have the recipes finalized. I've gone through multiple tasting rounds to make sure that it is where I want it to be. For everyone who's been guessing if it's related to bread, you're correct. Is this product aimed to make your bread experience even more delightful? Absolutely. I am so excited for you to finally have it in your hands. Sorry I can't say much about the process right now, but I will be documenting a lot of this journey to share with you once the product is launched. And hopefully, if everything goes right, it should be launching by the end of the year. So, more to come. That should wrap up our Q&A. It's a bit of a long one, but I feel like I still haven't answered a bunch of your questions, so I'm actually gonna try and answer a couple of them down below if you wanna leave them in the comments. But that's all for today. I will see you in the next video. Bye.